The town of Bassendean acknowledges the past and present traditional owners of the land in which we gather to conduct this meeting and pays its respects to the elders both past and present. Thank you. Just some housekeeping. Members of the public are requested to sign the attendance sheet located on the table at the rear of the council chamber. Moving on to item 2, a little further housekeeping. It should be noted that public questions and comments are recorded and live streamed via YouTube. And there is no protection from legal action against being taken against you should arise from your comments delivered at the meeting. If you could be mindful of that. Moving on to item 2.1, public question time. Members of the public who wish to do so may ask questions at this point. Are there any that would like to ask questions? Thank you very much. Val Dwyer, if you'd like to make your way to the microphone. Identify yourself, please.
Will I bring it down to my height? Is it on? I want a correction of the minutes for last meeting. When I brought up about Walter Road, it was going from 4 lanes down to 2. In your report, it's got 1 lane. I don't think we would manage very well with 1 lane.
Thank you for that. We'll make that correction. It's noted.
The other one is at Guildford Road. Who was responsible for Guildford Road between Perth Road and Guildford Bridge? Is it the Shire or main roads? It
is. My understanding is, I may be corrected, it is not the town that maintains that road. It is the state government. I could defer to Mr. Stolman Stewart-Hawkins.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Yes, it's the road is under the care and control of Main Roads, Western Australia.
Main Roads, Western Australia.
What I was going to say is you've got a great importance on Bassendean, on Old Perth Road. When you come into Bassendean, that medium strip that I always complain about to get the curbing fixed, now that's been fixed some time, but here's the plastic bags still there. The next strip where the back boys are, half of those are broken. And I mean, even the centre part, there's weeds along there and plastic bottles. Now, I don't think that's a good appearance for Bassendean. There's a little bit more than just Old Perth Road. So I don't, and if you're at the lights on the bridge there, you should see all the weeds on the medium strip. They're not on this side, but on the other side. And the other one is the medium strip from Morley Drive, from Wick Street down to Lord Street. That's hit and miss how that's looked after. So I just think that some of those things need to be attended to by somebody. And the other bright idea I have is that I think you're wanting a place for mothers and children to gather at. Have you ever thought of going over to the Church of Christ? Because they've got quite a lot of buildings there and it might interest them to rent out something, and there's plenty of parking. That's my bit. Oh, sorry. I would like to compliment the new CEO on her coming down and chatting to us who'd pay you lot. That's a brilliant idea.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Dwyer. Those comments have been noted. You are right. First impressions are very important. And I've got no doubt who would be the responsible officer that could take note of those concerns and do something about it.
In regards to the maintenance of the mic doesn't seem to be working. Hello? Oh, that's me. I think. In regards to the landscaped areas of Guildford Road, the town of Bassendean actually does look after those maintenance areas, and so I'll follow that up on behalf of Mrs. Dwyer with the asset services staff.
Thank you very much. You've got a commitment that those matters will be attended to. You've got a commitment that those matters will be attended to.
I have another idea. You've got empty shops up there, and who owns them? Who doesn't want to spend any money on it?
That's another matter that actually is being addressed by our new CEO.
You ever thought of an IGA, competition to coal?
Thank you very much. Mrs. Dwyer will we are doing something about that. So thank you very much. No, you're always welcome. Are there any other? Yes. Mr. Kay.
Yeah, Bruce Kay, 11 Earls Ferry Court, Bassendean. My question relates to tonight's minutes, which confirm the adoption of the minutes from last meeting. And one of the items in the last meeting was the structure plan changes and going out to consultation, and included the proposed marketing plan. And having that adopted at last meeting, I'm sure that Mr. Dowling is continuing to put that in place. But my question, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is to you and the councillors, because my understanding of community consultation, unless you, the Mayor and the councillors actually attend some of these and actually push the changes with the people, we've got two choices with variations possibly. So unless the councillors actually attend and talk to the people and tell them we're doing this or this, we'll end up in the same soup we ended up with in 2008, which Councillor Gangel is now desperately trying to restore Old Perth Road. So my question is, are the councillors, I'm not saying all, but are the councillors going to attend all the consultation events which are listed here in Bassendean, one in Eden Hill, one down in Ashfield?
Thanks very much, Mr. Kay. In answer to your question in respect to the engagement of councillors, this matter is scheduled for a councillors' workshop. So those things that you've brought up will be taken heed of during this councillors' workshop that's scheduled to deal with this matter.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Pleasure. Fran Phelan.
Fran Phelan, 15 River Street. Regarding 10.13, River Parks and Gardens, or River Parks Committee.
Fran, talk to the
do they include the Point and Success Hill? Because all we see is Ashfield and Mindaring Park.
And the question, sorry,
The question is, do you include the Point and Success Hill in your Rivers Park Committee?
we certainly do. Perhaps Mr. Stuart Dawkins.
Sorry, it's reversed. Is that working?
No.
No. Yes, the instrument of council's instrument of appointment includes the committee's. Council's instrument of appointment includes the inclusion of those parks, Success Hill and Point Reserve, the River Parks Committee.
Thank you very much. At the moment, it may seem that we're focusing more on Ashfield Flats and the Ashfield wetlands, but those two areas form a very important part of the River Parks Committee. Just that currently we're dealing with that issue there. Mr. Veal, you had your hand up.
Ian Veal, 33 Bassendean Parade. I just was interested in the comment of the first speaker, where she's talking about the Guildford Bridge, the two bridges at Guildford, and I think it's the where they run the pipe across as well. And it's it's an issue that needs to be dealt with, and you've dealt with that. But there's a much more serious issue when you look at that particular area there, and you look at the most recent flood study report that's been released, and anybody that goes across there can see a huge amount of fill between the actual bridge and I think the water bridge. Now, if you look at the erosional problem that's on Success Hill, which is extremely serious and getting worse, anybody that gets on the river and goes along there can see this, and I go there along there many, many times, and I think somebody else over there goes there as well. Now, if you look at that issue, and I don't know when that fill was put there, but I would say if it was put there 50 years ago, then that erosional problem that's on Success Hill in two places is probably caused by that fill. If you look at the Water Corporation maps, the current, I don't know what the current map is, but it'll be a metre lower than what it is now. That fill that's been placed between the two bridges is lifting over a distance of about 150 metres. It's lifting the AHD of the flood heights there for the 100-year flood about 0.6 of a metre. Now, that 0.6 of a metre impacts further on. It further on stream at Woodbridge and at Guildford and houses that are there, particularly now when there's going to be changes of the AHD levels there. So I wonder, and I think the answer over there as to who was responsible for it was the main roads department. But if that fill is not required anymore, and it certainly hasn't been required for the last 25 years, and I'm not even quite sure what was put there in the first place, it may well be that the council should look at that issue and see whether there's any chance of that fill being removed, because it's not doing anything except impacting on the flood heights there. So I wonder if the council could, or the committee that you're on, Bob, that's the, I think it's the
River Parks Committee.
Yeah, the River Parks Committee could put that on agenda for someone to have a look at it and see if something maybe in the short or long term can be done about that.
Thanks very much, Mr. Veal. Your point is noted, and perhaps prior to the next River Parks Committee, we could have somebody go and have a look and report to the River Parks Committee on the necessity for that fill and what can be done about it. Thanks very much.
Through the Chair, it'd be appreciated if an email could be provided to the town so that we can follow that up.
Mr. Veal, the request was made that you provide a short email to the town, just outlining your concerns, and then that can be taken up and reported to the River Parks Committee for inclusion on their agenda. So thank you very much for that. Aaron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 48 Aaron McKay, 48 Watson Street, Bassendean. My question's about I call it a park, but it's probably not really much of a park. Between Watson Street, Whitfield Street, and Bridson Street, it's only about 1,000 square metres. Recently, 2 trees were planted directly in about the middle of the lawn area of it. This sort of makes it very, unusable for people who just want to go down and kick a footy or something. There's not a lot of parks around that area, and I'm just curious as to why the council decided to plant the 2 trees right in the middle of the park when they could have parked it around, planted them around the edge of the park or something. Just seems a bit of a waste.
Thank you for that. Are there any further questions?
No?
That's fine. Look, I can understand it's a balancing act between planting trees and the public open green space, and the need for that to be able to play sports like kicking the football, and the hindrance trees being planted there can cause. What can be done about it? That could be deferred to Mr. Stuart Dawkins.
Yes, look, I'm familiar with the planting, but in regards to a specific answer as to why the trees were planted exactly where they are, I couldn't answer that. I know that there was an offset in regards to the property boundary, so that they wouldn't at maturity overhang the rear properties, but in regards to their specific location, I wouldn't be able to answer that.
So I suppose I could ask the question, do we have a planting plan, or when trees are planted out, is it to a plan, or are they just, there's 2 trees to go in the park and they're put wherever that can be accommodated?
Through the Chair, the park supervisor identifies the planting requirements for each park, and so that's how those trees arrived at that location.
Thank you. Aaron, the question is, how long ago were those trees planted?
Probably a couple of months ago. Now, I did raise the question with Renee when I saw her one day, but I never actually received any feedback from it.
So your point is that it reduces the use of the park for recreation?
It is a very tiny open space, and to plant the 2 trees where they planted them just seems such a waste of a bit of lawn area that's close to everyone's house that they can just go down and do a little activity on. if you have it, if someone actually goes out there, you can actually see where another tree was planted and the stump's still there from it obviously died. And you wonder why didn't they plant another tree back in that location instead of planting them where they planted them.
Thank you for your question and your concern. If you could provide a brief email to the town, if there's an opportunity and it's appropriate that they be repositioned, that's something that could be considered.
Okay. Who would I address it to?
Just the town of Bassendean.
Town of Bassendean.
Admin.
Mail of Bassendean. Okay, thank
It's
you.
on the website, so thank you very much. Most certainly, Mr. Yates.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions, if I may.
You got 2 minutes.
Wait, can we say late? 120 seconds. Don Yates, 10 Thompson Road, Success Hill. Is the council still tied up and keen for the infant healthcare centre at the Pensioner Cottage? Is that a quick, simple answer?
Well, my understanding is yes, most certainly.
Okay. Do you see any links or common ground between infant healthcare centres and childcare centres?
There's an obvious link. Children are involved.
Yeah, okay. I would hope, I guess to the council, there's the guidelines for the application of the Health of Public Building Regulations 1992, and to a part, I guess, the infant healthcare centre fits into that. But there's another planning bulletin called Planning Bulletin 72 related to childcare centres. And it just seems a shame that when you look through the Planning Bulletin 72, on so many issues, the infant healthcare centre fails. So is there somebody looking into Planning Bulletin 72 of 2009? Because, for example, do you have a clearance there as far as contaminated sites are concerned? Do you have that certificate?
We have to take that on notice, Mr. Yates.
I just think that there's a number of issues, and it'd be nice to see that some sort of recognition by the councillors into, like I say, Planning Bulletin 72. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your concern, and it is noted. The CEO's riding away furiously. We will have that checked out, and some kind of response will be available. Thanks very much. Are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on to item 2.2, addresses by members of the public. Do we have any member of the public who would like to make an address? Yes, sir. If you could come up and identify yourself, please.
My name's Paul Geyer. Can you get the microphone? I'm a resident at 40.
It doesn't appear to be plugged in.
It's
That's probably helpful. There we go. My name's Paul Geyer. I'm the resident at 41A Broadway. And I'm here to make a statement with regards to item, I think it's 10.2 on the agenda, the 8 units, the proposed 8-unit development at 39 Broadway. We raised some concerns with this development back in 2015, and while they're pretty much outside of the scope of the development, of any objections that could be raised, or they have been dealt with, there's still some points we'd like to raise, even if we may be able to do much with them. Before I go into any detail on the matter, I'd say that we do recognise the need for development in the area, and certainly for a block of land that's been vacant for 3 years, it's probably even more urgent. As I said, first point, the document, and I believe the council notes for tonight mention the 375 metres as the crow flies from the train station. All the documents I've seen, and that includes the Town of Bassendean local planning strategy, measure distance based on how the person would walk or drive. In fact, based on the maps I've seen, it says that 39 Broadway is right on the border of the medium high density zone, right in that 400 metre border. So that said, having a look at Google Maps, it's at least 400 to 450 metres walking distance from 39 Broadway to the pedestrian entrance, the stairs at the corner of the station. Second point, with the exception of some larger blocks, the unit density is out of character with a large portion of the town area north of the railway line, and yes, I know it's not against the Arcos, but there have been 4 developments on Broadway closer to the station than 39 Broadway in the past, well, since the block's been vacant. Only one of which I'd characterise as high density, and that's the set of 6 or 8 apartments on the corner of Broadway and Ivanhoe, behind the bottle shop there. The rest have either been small-scale 2-storey developments, like 38 Broadway, and there's been one single dwelling development, I forget the address, and a group of single-storey villas also close to the end of Broadway there. 2 final points at least. I guess now that the owner of the block is financial again, I'd hope that they'd get around to cutting the tall and very dry grasses on the block there. I know we've been in the Rangers' ear pretty much every year for the past 3 years to get it, to get the council in to get it cut, so it's a good thing. And lastly, while I know it won't happen here, I would like to put forward the idea that at some point the council look at purchasing a vacant block or looking at unutilised public space and turning it into the likes of a community garden, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Guy. Does anybody else wish to address council at this time? We'll move on to item 3. Attendances, apologies and applications for leave of absence. There's one that I have is our Mayor, Councillor Renee McLennan. She is on a leave of absence. No others? Moving on to item 4, deputations. We have one deputation this evening from Mr. Graham King. Mr. King?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. May I stand at the front?
No, certainly.
Thank you. Actually, Graham, before that, oh, you wanted to do the other one first? You can do something else before. Very typical issue here, showing my age. Okay, I've got a deputation which applies to item 1013 and about the River and Parks Committee response. So I'm just going to show you a bit of an introduction. Sorry, I've got a gun in left hand. Okay, if you just watch this video, you'll see it quickly. Watch closely on the left. Okay, that gets the point.
Why some of those jet streams?
Yeah, so that's, and the ferry does more than the speed limit, just for indications. Let me just get this. Yeah. Okay, so let's page up, something's happened here. Right, so we've got the first one. Okay, so I'm standing in the wrong spot here. You can see?
You're fine, you're fine.
Okay, that's a couple of photographs from the riverbank. What's been occurring over the last couple of weeks, and other kayaks will know, it's been very low tides. And in both those photographs, the one is at the bottom of North Road, intersection of Bassendean Parade. All those trees along there are undercut, and you only see this when the tide is out. When the tide's up, it all looks actually very nice. Second photograph is along next to Ashfield Flats, and you can see the posts there, which are where the path is fenced off from the river. Again, when the tide is up, it looks really nice. That is actually all undercut, and it's just a matter of time when those trees are going to fall in. And I'd argue that's to do with both wash. Okay, got some technical problems. This is just outside your area, Bob, and Bassendean Ashfield Parade. In this area over here, you can see the mouse. But in the centre, there's a large eucalypt. All the roots are very badly undercut. On the right-hand side of the picture, another eucalypt very badly undercut. And this is basically an unconsolidated slope which is failing. Down the bottom, something slightly different. This is if you stand at Sandy Beach Reserve and you look down the river almost due north. On the left-hand side is Ascot Kayak Club. On the right-hand side is the Ashfield Flats. You've got rock armouring, limestone along the bank here, pretty good vegetation. And in the middle here, you'll notice there's a house standing proud with nothing in front of it. Now, I would never suggest someone has cut vegetation down. All I'd point out, it looks very odd how that vegetation's missing. There may be something that people would like to investigate, because there's nothing wrong with that bank, it's armoured. So the next one, just as an indication of the importance of vegetation, some of you might have seen this. This is just a nest of fledgling darters, and it's in that bush where the mouse is over there. And it just underlines the importance of having vegetation right up to the riverbank and having it dense enough such that it stops people getting close to the bank, and it provides refuge from natural predators. There's a number of other bird species that nest on the river trees. So moving along. Right. Moving along at all. Okay, yep, we are. So the recommendation, enforce the existing speed limit, and with reference to item 1013, which is on page 62 of the agenda, what I'm asking is to include in the recommendations to council, which are on page 63, is to endorse the Department of Planning, Land and Heritage, asking the Department of Transport to install speed camera or cameras, which is consistent with item 3A of the River Parks Committee minutes from the 13th of this month. I'm not quite sure how that got missed, but that's one recommendation. The second one is to inform rangers and residents, and this might be via the Bassendean briefings or other methods, on how to report boats speeding to the Department of Transport. I do it quite regularly. They do follow up. They do take it seriously. They appreciate it, and it's quite straightforward. And I'm willing to work with the town staff just to share that information. It's quite straightforward. And then the two effects down there, obviously if the boats go slower, it reduces the damage caused by the wash. The other thing is it's 22 kilometres from the edge of the Belmont Ski Park, where the speed limit it comes in, up to the Reed Highway Bridge. If you go at 5 knots, which is the speed limit, it'll take you about 2.5 hours each way. A lot of people, you say to them, it's 5 hours to get up there and back. They won't go, which means you reduce the number of boats and you reduce the wash. So it's a double effect. Okay, the next topic, I'm changing gear a bit. Okay, I'll move on to responsible fishing. Whoops, don't want to show you that one yet. Hang on. Okay, on this, in these photographs, the top right and the bottom two, in all those photographs, there's, sorry Graham, there's people fishing, there's a little duck down the bottom there, there's a little duck sitting here, and there's a duck sitting there, there's another one over there, there were more around. In all those instances, there's people feeding the ducks right next to where they're fishing. 2 weeks ago, there was 4 ducks hooked in 1 week, which had to be rescued. The top left is a guy who's fishing further away from the pelicans, and he was deliberately casting further away to avoid entangling them. There's a common perception that birds get hooked up with fishing line because it's discarded line, which is left lying around, and it would all be prevented if you put it in the bins. From my observations in doing bird rescues, that accounts for less than half of it. Most of it is due to active fishing, and where the nexus has been created between people feeding birds and people fishing. So birds naturally go to where people are, and it attracts them there to get hooked. For those who've got a weak stomach, squint or don't look at the next slide, but this is just a few photographs coming up of what I have a lot of from rescues that are taken out. Top left, a duck, a tortoise. Bob, that was compliments near you. And that other great cormorant booked all in the Bassendean area, all in the last few months. It averages across the Perth metropolitan area about 1 a day. So the recommendation is education. encourage responsible disposal of tackle. This is one of these reeling boxes, which are several in the town, which is great. Possibly an article as a suggestion to council to consider in the Bassendean briefing. I'm happy to provide any information, happy to draft something. I don't mind if the draft's completely reworked. And possibly Eastern Reporter. I see you're not sure they're here tonight. And then install additional signage. Some of these poles have space for additional signage. I'll give an example on the next slide. And the information will be to discourage feeding wildlife, and therefore you break that link between fishermen or people and wildlife, and sensible fishing, which I'll give a bit more information on next slide. And then apply for grants if there's a shortage of money for these signs, and use volunteers to install signs. I'm a happy volunteer. I've installed a couple of poles and signs already in the town, but on the Department of Land's terrain. And I'm quite willing to help and do it, and I know there's other volunteers willing to do it as well. And so lastly, this is a prototype information sign. The reason I haven't put the exact organisation there, it's dependent on the feeling of council, because that could be the Wildcare Helpline, it could be West Australian Seabird Rescue, it could be other groups, it could be individuals who are in the town, like snake handlers. And then there's a bit of information at the bottom, simple stuff, how you minimise harm to wildlife. Don't feed it, especially near where people fish, and when fishing, don't cast near wildlife. If you do catch a bird, there's some simple steps which you can do. The worst thing people do is they cut the line, and then you've got a bird running around with a hook through somewhere, tangle up in the line, and then it makes it really hard. So that was it. Did I make 10 minutes?
You certainly did. What a knocker. Thanks very much, Mr. King.
Thank you.
Nobody here doubts your passion for looking after our river, as all the rest of us do. Thank you very much for your presentation. And the points you brought up have been noted.
Can we have the number of the agency that's speaking to contact?
Sorry, go through the chair, but I can provide that to the appropriate person in town management or council, and then I can let you circulate how you want.
And can we please have a copy of your presentation?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
I'd like to ask a question of Mr. King.
Certainly.
Sorry, yeah.
Thanks very much for the presentation, and thanks also for the work that you do on rescuing birds. I know that you're very active in your own time to do that, and it's a great benefit to our community. I just wanted to ask you, I guess, what your feeling was between the difference between having, say, signs as a way of educating people and having engineering solutions as a way of changing and altering behaviour. And I was just wondering if you've given any thought to maybe designated fishing areas where there was some separation, I guess, of fishing activity from some of the other bird areas at all?
The short answer is yes. I'm working more broadly with Recfish West and Ozfish and DBCA. I'm trying to get broad education, but it's always great to start sort of at home, if you want to call it like that. And there have been some suggestions of areas free of vegetation, so you might have a little drop point. There are some jetties, all the jetties are closed at the moment, as you know. But in short answer to your question, I think it's worthy of exploration, of further discussion of how we could engineer it out or reduce the risk. Absolutely agree. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. King. Councillor Wilson. Move on to item 8. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Point 5. I jumped ahead of myself. Move to item 5, confirmation of minutes. Item 5.1, ordinary council meeting held on 30th October 2018. The officer's recommendation for the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on October 18 be received. And item 5. We'll deal with 5.1a first. Do we have a mover? Councillor Wilson?
There was a point raised by one of the questioners to suggest that one of the items needed to be amended, so I would move it subject to amendment.
That's just receiving that. You do that the next
Can
one.
we be reminded?
Okay.
Can we be reminded of that, please?
That's true record the next one.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry,
yes,
Mr. Chairperson, it was in relation to Mrs. Dry's question on Walter Road, referencing it going down from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. In the minutes, it's reported as 1 lane. So that's the correction that should be made.
if we can make that correction, based on that fact that that correction will be made, can we have a move for the officer's recommendation 5.1a? Councillor Wilson, seconded. Councillor Gangel. Moving on to item 5.1b, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on October 18 be confirmed as a true record. Do we have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Gangel. Seconded. Councillor Mikachuk.
All those in favour?
All those in favour? Item 5.2, special council meeting held on... That's carried. Unanimously. Special council meeting, 5.2, special council meeting held on the 20th of November 2018. The officer recommendation 5.2a, the minutes of the special council meeting held on November 18 be received. Do we have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Hamilton, seconded. Councillor Mikachuk. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Officer recommendation 5.2b, that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 20th of November 2018 be confirmed as a true record. A mover for that, Councillor Wilson, seconded. Councillor Mikachuk. All in favour? Passed unanimously. Item 6, announcement by the presiding person without discussion. You will note that I'm standing in the stead of our Mayor, Renee McLennan. The meeting might be not run as smoothly because this is the first time in the chair, so I know you'll forgive me and we'll get through with a little bit of patience. So thank you very much for that. What? Item 7, petitions. Do we have any petitioners? No. Moving to item 8, declarations of interest. There are none. Item 9, business deferred from previous meeting. Item 9.1, dog law review 2018. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the preparation of the new dog law. Section 312(2) of the Act requires a person presiding at the council meeting to give notice to the meeting of the purpose and effect of the proposed local law in the prescribed manner. Do you have any questions? Councillor Wilson?
Just through the chair, so you just need to read the next section as well.
Thank you very much.
Purpose and effect.
Purpose and effect, dogs local law. The purpose of the proposed dogs local law is to provide for the management of dogs in the town of Bassendean in relation to containment, number of dogs at a premise and excretia. The effect of the proposed dog local law is that dog owners within the town are to comply with the provisions of this local law. Councillor Wilson, wish to say something?
No, in the absence of any other questions, I'd like to move the officer recommendation.
The officer recommendation that Council commences the advertising and consultation process outlined in clauses 3 and 3A of section 312 of the Local Government Act 1995 for the proposed dogs local law. Do we have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Wilson. Councillor Hamilton second. All in favour? That is carried. Move on to item 10, reports. Adoption of recommendations en bloc. We have the following items to be removed from en bloc. That is items 10.2, 10.3, 10.7, 10.13 and 10.21. Are there any further items that wish to be removed?
10.17.
10.17. Any others? We have a mover for the officer's recommendation. With the exclusion of those items mentioned, the Council adopts en bloc the following officer recommendations contained in the ordinary Council agenda 27 November 2018, with the exclusion of those ones mentioned. Councillor Wilson, moved Councillor Wilson, seconded Councillor Lukacek. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 10.2. Amended application for 8 multiple dwellings for minor design modifications and to extend the period of validity of approval. Lot 761 in brackets number 39 Broadway, Bassendean. Applicant owner Praetorium Proprietary Limited. The application seeks to amend a development approval that was previously granted by Council at its ordinary Council meeting held 28th of April 2015 for the development of 8 multiple dwellings, brackets apartments by, making minor design modifications which address condition 1 from the original approval along with other very minor design changes, and extending the period of validity of the now expired development approval. These matters are discussed in more detail within the body of the report. The application is referred to a council meeting for determination, noting that A, the original application was determined by council, and B, when originally determined, the application was the subject of neighbour consultation and objections were received in response to that application. Are there any questions in relation to that, this matter? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question relates to the maintenance of the vacant block with relation to fire hazards such as long grass and the maintenance of fire breaks. Who is responsible for maintaining the condition and to what standard, and how is that policed?
Yes, through the Chair, the Ranger Services, they do inspections each year and issue notices. This year we've done the same process, so I'd have to take on notice in regards and provide councillors that information in this week's bulletin. But we've issued quite a number of infringements for property owners who have not complied with the Bushfire Act, and they've issued with fines. And then if they do not undertake the work, the town of Bassendean arranges its contractors to go in and undertake the work, and then we charge them for that work.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
And just a supplemental question, now that it's been identified as an issue by one of the ratepayers here today, will that block be...
Look, I'm guessing that it's actually already been addressed, and probably as part of our administrative process in regards to issuing a letter. I don't know, I'd have to go and check that. It has been included, so we've already issued a letter to the property owner.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Are there any other questions regarding this matter? No, sorry. Councillor Hamilton.
Oh no, I'll let Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Wilson.
Before I ask the question, there's just a little bit of relevant information. There has been raised with me several times by members of community the approval process for 8 units on a residential block, and there's a lot of confusion in the community as to why it is that the council has allowed 8-unit developments units on what previously was a single house on the property. Can staff confirm for me that it is in fact an interpretation of the R codes by the state government that allows for 8 units to go on there, not something that the council has changed?
Hello? Yeah, this was caused by an amendment to the residential design codes, I think in 2015, where multiple dwellings could be assessed and approved on the basis of plot ratio, and where the density code was R40, which meant generally then you'd get 8 apartments where the residential density code is R40 but only allows, say, 4 group dwellings. So it's state enforced. I suppose in response to that, the council has amended its scheme through amendment number 8, which has kind of curtailed the development of multiple apartments on plot ratio to within 800 metres of Bassendean train station. And I suppose to answer a question made in the deputation, this property is located within that 800 metres.
I have a question. I might have missed it then. Distance from, our distance, are they measured linear? How are they measured? Walking distance or linear distance?
So the distance, the gentleman made reference to the local planning strategy, and the local planning strategy was talking about rolling out higher density in the future, the stuff that Mr. Dowling is looking at, and that was suggesting, I think, densities of R80 to R100 within 400 metres of the train station, and I think about R60 in between 400 and 800 metres. But we measure the distances, and it's shown on the scheme map. To get to the higher density, or to get to the plot ratio, it's walking distance from the entrance to Bassendean train station, but that figure is 800 metres, not 400.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
During the briefing session I did ask about this property, and we know that it was demolished in 2014. We know the approval was in April 2015, and the approval is normally 2 years. I have a hard time understanding how they can get an extension on that approval after such a long term. So my question is, if we, for instance, approve this now, it would automatically get another 2 years. And there's no obligation on the property owners to actually develop that land in that time. Theoretically, they could come back and ask for another extension for an approval after that period as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So...
Can I just, I suppose, to expand on that answer, it's the local planning scheme regulations that allow a development to be renewed even though it's expired. Now that was introduced, I think, in 2015, and I suppose the real difference is that the application can be renewed at a reduced fee as opposed to being treated as a new application. So that's the implication of allowing applications that have expired to be renewed, but it is open to council to impose a condition with a reasonable shorter time frame than the 2 years, if that's the will of council.
That's what I was going to come to, that if we did, for instance, approve this, we could approve it for a shorter timeline. We could, for instance, turn around and say that the approval flows on from when the last approval expired. Could we not?
You really need a time, and if council wanted to say give an approval for 12 months, it should add a condition to that as opposed to a 2-year approval.
Well, I understand we don't have to give an approval because the project has not substantially commenced.
That, I wouldn't see that as relevant. The scheme, the regulations allow an application to be renewed even if it's expired. So if you're not looking at approving, you're really looking for reasons to refuse the application and to identify those reasons.
So as I discussed during the briefing session, the unintended consequences of this is that a developer can clear fell a site, then have that site at a reduced rates income for council for some number of years, and there seems to be no mechanism to force development of that land, and as we've heard from residents, it then falls into disrepair with overgrown grass. So we seem to have very few mechanisms at our fingertips to compel things to go along the path that they're supposed to. So this one is a rather difficult one, folks. Anyway, I'll let somebody else ask a question.
A question. My understanding is from the expiration of the previous 2-year period, there's been a period of 19 months. Yes or no, approximately?
Probably.
Would it be appropriate, therefore, to backdate any approval for an extension for 2 years back to that date, which would give them 5 months to come back to us with amended plans? 5 months is...
I suppose council could. 5 months seems a bit short to me, and what that'll mean that if the development is not substantially commenced within 5 months, council will be asked then to issue another approval to renew the consent at the expiration of that.
I'm mindful of what Councillor Hamilton said about motivating those people to actually do something, because we could be sitting here in 3 or 4 years' time and still nothing has been done. There's obvious financial implications for the town. But above and beyond that, the residents need some finalisation as well. 5 months is a short period, but they can hardly object, considering it's been 19 months from the expiration of their previous 2-year period to now. 5 months is still a considerable time. Puts that onus back on them to act.
As I've said, council could impose such a condition with a 5 month, so the development would need to be substantially commenced within 5 months or 6 months, 5. In terms of objection, there would be a right of review to the State Administrative Tribunal.
Yes, we understand that was likely to be the final arbiter. But so could we consider a 30th recommendation that the proponents be granted an extension of 5 months?
Can I ask another question?
Yes, Councillor Hamilton.
Mr. Reid, you've just mentioned that the applicant could appeal to the State Administrative Tribunal. So can I ask, the officers have obviously got all these conditions relating to the development. If this went to the State Administrative Tribunal, does that mean you start with a clean slate again with conditions? In other words, do these conditions carry forward to the State Administrative Tribunal, or do you actually, can the applicant argue the conditions?
I suppose it would be open to the applicant. So an applicant can appeal against any condition on an approval. I don't think there's any objections to the recommended conditions, but they are appealable, and if council puts a condition on that limits the length of the approval, that too would be appealable.
Councillor Ganshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Can I just ask the planning officer in relation to, while we're talking about appeals and the like, if council was to impose something outside of the officer recommendation, such as a shortened time frame for approval, could I just get an understanding, if it did go to this SAT, whether or not the officers could represent council and what the cost to council would be?
I wasn't anticipating that question, but I think in as much as it's not a fundamental change, it's not turning a recommendation of approval into a refusal, I think officers would be able to defend that decision without saying you need to get a planning consultant or a lawyer involved.
Therefore, Councillor Wilson.
Some months ago, we had an application before us for a 10-unit development on Lord Street, I think just to the north of Success Hill. Can you confirm that that's the same category of application that we dealt with there?
I think the application was close to Lord Street, but in Walder Road East. I think the one you're referring to was a DAP application where they asked for an extension of time, and in that case the application was refused ultimately for the extension of time. But in that case the planning framework had changed because that site was beyond 800 metres from the Bassendean train station.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Any other questions? What I'd ask is that we consider including an extra recommendation. I don't see it's included in the body here, that we grant a further extension of 2 years backdated the expiration of the previous period. Does that make sense?
Previous approval.
Say again?
The expiry date of the previous approval.
The expiry date of the previous approval.
Something like that. Yep.
Councillor Manchick?
Sorry, could I just get some clarity for how much that shortens the period by, in effect, like what practical implication it has?
5 months from this. 19 months, is it?
Say again?
19 months?
April 2015 was when council did the original approval, so I'm not sure.
If you could stand, please, Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry.
Thank you.
In the documents I read that April 2015 was when council originally passed the approval. So I'm not sure how it works from there. I would assume the 2-year period probably commenced fairly quickly after that. Would that be right, Mr. Reid?
Sorry, I missed the second part.
I would assume, I'm not sure of the process, but I would assume that the 2-year period commenced either when the council did the approval or shortly afterwards when you got the development when the DA was done.
It just seems to me that if this is the will of council, the cleanest way to deal with it is say this development shall be substantially commenced within 6 months or 5 months of the date of this approval. Otherwise, it shall have no effect.
6 months would be
Or
nice round figure.
or 12 months?
6 months.
I'd make a point. They're not starting from a blank sheet. It's not as if we're asking them to start from a blank sheet. They already have substantial plans in place, so it wouldn't be too onerous if we were to give them 6 months. That would be.
Can I say,
Your comment from you?
I don't want to enter debate.
No, I understand.
It seems to me like the development has not commenced, either because there's not a market for it at the moment, or struggling to obtain finance to implement the development.
Councillor Wilson.
If council were to adopt the recommendations to vary the approval as set out in the officer recommendation, would there be considerable amendments needed to the plans?
No, I understand that most of the amendments have already been done.
So my point that they're not starting from a blank sheet would be valid, yes or no?
Yes.
So are we amenable to including a 30th recommendation that we approve an extension, 2-year extension, backdated to the expiration of the previous period? We have comment from council on that?
I'm not, but we can take through the process.
It just seems cleaner to say this development shall be substantially commenced within 6 months of the date of this approval. It has the same effect, but it's probably more precise.
Councillor Mickett?
Yeah, so I had another question to clarify things. Through the chair, Mr. Reid, am I right reading between the lines that you're saying the reasons why this hasn't commenced aren't necessarily going to be rectified by shortening the period and therefore may not compel the owners to develop more swiftly, and that the matter could end up coming back to council for subsequent extension?
That's a possibility.
So we're dealing with a situation where we've got 5, 6 months or 12 months. I wouldn't be unhappy with a. Excuse me. We have a discussion. I wouldn't be unhappy with 12 months. My point is, this is a problem of their own making. 19 months ago, if they had applied as they should have done for an extension, it probably would have been granted. We would be in that period now. It's not a problem of our making, it's a problem of their making. That's my point.
I guess the best way to proceed would be for someone to move a motion to take it through the process, because there's probably differing ideas about what the time frame should be.
Well, I'm quite happy to extend it for a period of 12 months. If that's a compromise, we're prepared to accept.
Moving the officer recommendation with the point.
Move the officer recommendation with the amendment that the proponents be provided with an additional 12 months
extension.
Does
anyone say that? Well, if you want to move the officer recommendation, you do that, and then we debate it. Yeah. If you don't,
you do it.
It's up to you.
Is he moving his own with an amendment?
Okay.
I think he's moving off.
Okay, we'll get this back on track. Do we have a mover for the officer's recommendation?
And a seconder.
Councillor Gangel, seconded Councillor Quinn. All in favour? Those against?
You'll have to use your casting vote.
I would use my casting vote in the negative. However, I would then propose. Come here. Excuse me. This is what I explained previously. Okay, just the names of the people who voted for. Hands up those who voted for.
I voted for.
Gangel, Mickett and Quinton. Those against?
Should we open it up to debate then?
Yeah.
We have to open it up for debate then.
Those against?
If there's people against, then we open it up for debate.
Okay, the matter is open for debate. Councillor Gangel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Look, I'm comfortable with the officer recommendation, as has been outlined by Councillor Wilson earlier on, that this is an interpretation by the state which had these style of developments occurring. As we've heard from Mr. Reid, of late they have ceased largely because the finance hasn't been able to be obtainable. Therefore, construction's been unable to start. I'm not too sure when we're talking about lessening the time frame allowed for the approval, what that actually does. It either rushes a development, if any development is to occur, or it simply sends it back to council for us to deal with in a relatively short period of time again, or it goes through a very costly SAT process. So I believe the officer recommendation is a good model. The officers have looked at this. It is applicable. There is no planning grounds not to offer the extension. I would remind councillors that should council vote against the officer recommendation, and should later on this evening you wish to actually implement the officer recommendation, after council has voted against the officer recommendation, you will require a rescission motion to then implement the officer recommendation. So if it's a 3-3 and the casting vote is not to approve the officer recommendation, then in order to actually adopt the officer recommendation in some other format, a rescission motion would need to take place. But could I just say it's pleasing to see some people who are now on council understand the processes are slightly different to when you are on the other side of the gallery. So welcome, Councillor Hamilton, and I look forward to your engagement in this debate.
Second.
I agree with Councillor Gantel. We have had a statewide appeal in Perth consultation process, and the town of Bassendean is obligated to build 4,000 new dwellings by 2050. If there are no planning issues with this, it's within the 800 metres, which means we are going to be building new apartments, new housing for people to accommodate the extra population that our city needs to build. We're about to go through a new consultation process for designing our new town and developing transport-orientated developments as well. Now, just in relation to this discussion about shortening the time frame, that's policy on the run, and I'm really not interested or comfortable with us making decisions about policy as last minute things. We are a community, we are supposed to be having these kinds of conversations with developers who want to come and build within our town so that we can accommodate another 4,000 dwellings within our town. So making this policy on the run, I think, is really disingenuous of us. Are we going to be doing this with every decision now, where we just write these policies and they sit on a shelf and we completely ignore them on our own whim? So I don't think that that's a very good way of governance. We've had this now for a week. I think if someone had concerns, they could have made contact with the applicant to see what the situation was. That didn't happen, and now we're making a knee-jerk reaction. So I urge councillors to vote for this. It ticks all of the boxes that we need to build our town and to set those obligations under the new developments that we need.
All of those things that Councillor Quinton says are true if in fact the development gets built. And the situation that we find ourselves in is for reasons unknown to me but known to the owner. Application was sought and granted by our town for a development, and no progress has been made. There are, as we've heard tonight, objections from some of the close neighbours. I imagine those objections go to a sense of privacy or a sense of being overlooked or overshadowed by a building that perhaps they feel is out of character with the rest of the streets on the house. And I understand those concerns. It's not just on Broadway, it's also in the avenues as well, where there are residential homes that have a particular feel, but were all built at the same time. And in amongst these residential homes, new, brutal, austere 8-unit developments have been smack bang right in the middle of them, and it's very disconcerting for the people who live in those streets that believe that they've bought into an area and then that area has changed rapidly around. So I understand those concerns, but that said, I also understand now, having been elected onto council, that the state government has changed the way that it interprets some of these provisions, and while we might have a view as neighbours or as individual councillors, that view would not hold scrutiny if it went to the SAT for appeal. And that's a problem for those of us who want to maintain pockets of, I guess, communities of interest within the town that have a sense of livability and feel to them. Because if council were to knock it back, we would just be overridden at the SAT. Because it's in keeping with what the state government has interpreted is allowed to be done. So I brought on debate so that I could make those points. I will ultimately be voting in favour of this approval, but I recognise that there's a bigger issue at play here, which is needs to be picked up in the town planning scheme. You know, what sort of town do we want? Do we want to have haphazard development where you've got large houses with lawns and gardens on them next to 8-unit developments, or do we want to focus the additional housing that Sarah Quinton says that we need to accommodate so that we can stop urban sprawl in a more coordinated and coherent way? So maybe having more height closer to the train stations and keeping some of the character areas of our town the way they are. That work will have to be done as we look at our town planning scheme and the way that we go through that. But yes, I will be voting for this extension as per the Oxford recommendation, and I hope that the owner of the block finds the finance or the will to make it happen so that we realise some rate value, and I hope that in the meantime the owner maintains a clean yard with low grass so that it's not a fire hazard to the neighbours.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Personally, I don't disagree with the 29 officer recommendations. I sought to add an additional recommendation, and I was quite happy to have some flexibility in that. I started off with 5 months. I was quite happy to recommend a 12-month extension, bearing in mind the problem is the making of what Councillor Quinton calls a developer and says we are fence sitters. In fact, this is not a developer and a fence sitter. This has been going on since 2015. Completely ignoring the fact that the expiration of that 2 years, 19 months ago, that they were required to ask for an extension. We could be off council. It could be another decade before these people develop. It is almost like land banking. I appreciate your sentiments, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Quinton and Councillor Gangel. As I said, I don't disagree with the 29 recommendations. I wish to add a 30th, simply to get them motivated to do something. Recognise council are serious about the need to develop these places so we can meet our obligation by increasing our housing stock by 70% by the year 2050. I don't know how to exactly do that. If I could seek advice?
I would say it's too late.
It's too late. Okay, we'll put the officer recommendation to the vote.
Are there any other speakers?
Are there any other speakers?
I can speak against.
Okay.
Like Councillor Wilson, I have concerns about the process and some of the anomalies in the process which allow this process to go on and on and on without a development. If there's been approval given, I believe there should be a strict timeline for the implementation of that approval. If there's going to be an extension, then I believe there should be strict criteria around the governing of that extension.
No, I'm not going to.
It is true that there are certain aspects to this where if it did go to SAT, it's highly unlikely, as Councillor Gangel has so kindly pointed out, that we would be successful in a defence of this. However, an extension, it is entirely up to the discretion of council how long the period is for the extension that we offer, whether it be 12 months or 2 years. My concern is that we can do another 2-year extension right now and that block might grow a bit more grass and may still be there in 2 years' time without a stick turned over. And that's where we are at the moment with the rules and regulations as they stand.
Councillor Quinton, want to reply? No?
I believe
Yes,
Councillor
again,
Gangel was the mover.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Look, I'm just getting a little bit of mixed messaging. Initially, I heard that largely people didn't want this style of development. Now we're trying to rush this style of development through to make sure this style of development happens and happens quickly. Not too sure why. In relation to the timing, I don't really see how that's an issue. It is the prerogative of the owner of any piece of land, largely to do with the land what they want within the time frame they see fit. Obviously, if we're talking about vacant land, there are some provisions in other areas like differential rates that they have charged as a penalty for vacant land. But again, that is the owner's prerogative to have the land vacant. My grandmother's property, the property that the house was on at 24 Devon Road, Bassendean, has probably been vacant for a good decade now. The sky hasn't caved in, and we still continue on. So I'm just not too sure what really the timing makes in relation to backdating approvals and the like, especially when the zoning of the land remains exactly the same as what it was in 2015, as what it is tonight, as what it would be in 6 months' time. So I don't understand that. In relation to certainly appealing these things, the town, when we had our initial site commenced in 2nd Avenue, I believe we spent thereabouts $20,000 trying to appeal not to have this type of development in the town. Ultimately, we were unfortunately unsuccessful, but we did put considerable resources in to endeavouring to change the style. Not allow this sort of style of development. We also wrote to the various ministers, and we have made changes in relation to meterage from train stations for this style of development. And also, just on a side note, this is not, people may think it is, but it is not dense development. In fact, in Broadway, there's a series of, and I think they're actually quite nice. There's a series of two-storey houses, I think, that have been built about part way, probably directly opposite the block, if my memory serves me correct. So the height level is actually already there in the street across the road, with two-storey white houses that have been built, and obviously the ones on the corner as well. But yes, again, I'm not too sure what the urgency is for this style of development to take place, and I'm quite happy to approve the officer recommendation as stated. Thank you.
We're finished?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll put the officer recommendation to the vote. You've moved by Councillor Gangels, seconded by Councillor Quinton. All those in favour? Those against? It is passed 4-2. Wilson, Gangel, Mikachuk and Quinton are for. Against, Councillor Hamilton and Brown. Thanks for that. Moving directly on to, we're good there? Moving directly on to item 10.3, request for purchase of 246 Morley Drive, East Eden Hill. Councillor Grangill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I move the deferral motion to defer this item to the February 2019 Ordinary Council meeting to give the proponent the opportunity to respond to the comments raised in this report.
Moved, Councillor Gangel, seconded, Councillor Mitchell. All those in favour? Those against? We enter into debate.
No. Sorry, Mr. Chairperson, it's a procedural motion. There is no debate.
Were we not given
That
an
considered?
opportunity to ask questions beforehand?
Well, it's up to the chair.
That,
But I've moved to
that considered, all in favour? All those against? That is carried. In favour, Gangel, Wickerchuk, Quinton and Brown. Against, Wilson and Hamilton. Just bear with me for a second, please.
It must contain, maybe I didn't need to know. Yeah, but
That's what we have.
10.5.
If construction must start, they need to do it all if they feel like.
Thank you for that. Moving on to item 10.5, Old Perth Road Vibrancy Framework.
Thank you.
Application for council to consider a short-term targeted intervention to activate the west end of Old Perth Road. Do you have any questions on this matter? Councillor Gangel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Look, happy by and large with what's proposed. There is just one element that I wish to pull out and debate, and that is, I've lost where it is, it's the, there we are, the removal of the Chinese tallow trees I wish to pull out and debate. Mr. Chairperson.
Just before we go on, I've just been advised we need to change the officer recommendation with item 6.5, and that is point 3. It will change from approves the transfer of funds totaling 27,500 from the Art Infrastructure Reserve for mural arts projects associated with the public. Just stand by, please.
So we have to replace the Art Infrastructure Reserve with Public Arts Contributions Trust.
So read the same. Replace the Art Infrastructure Reserve with Public Arts Contribution Trust. It's just a change in name only. It doesn't substantially change the officer recommendation. Thanks. Well done. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I've just got a question on the same item. In the budget debate and budget consideration and in the Audit and Governance Committee, there's been some discussion about the wisdom of telegraphing to the market an exact budget that we would be prepared to spend up to. Coincidentally, many of the tenders that come in are often within $1,000 of the amount that we have specified we might be prepared to pay, and I'm just wondering if in this instance it might not be better to change the wording to council would exceed, say, expressions of interest for a mural, and then if those proposals came in, they would be costed, and then we could make a determination about how much we would spend at that point, rather than telegraphing what our budget would be in advance. And I say this more generally about everything that we do. Unless there's an answer that comes back that says there's some particular science in the exact amount that's been mentioned here.
Thank you for the question. Indeed, there is quite a bit of experience with the officers of the town on the cost of similar artworks that have been conducted in the town in the past, and we've also consulted with the peak body, and so the numbers that we've got are reasonably robust. They do provide for fair and equitable fees for professional artists, and is based on experience in the town already.
I guess within the resolution we have to put a amount. You could say it's up to 27.5, approximately 27.5. We need, as officers, we need to know an amount.
Councillor Wilson?
Unless, of course, the approach was taken which said that officers would seek expressions of interest for works in a particular place, and that through that process, quotes were given, and then council separately, in a confidential item, were to approve expenditure at that point.
It's a valid point. Councillor Gansel.
Yes, thank you. Just further on some of these suggestions, I just looking through it. There's provision here that says paint a brick. A section of footpath can be dedicated to residents adopting a single block. I think it's meant to be brick, and painting it or personalising it. I'm concerned regarding making sure that there's some sort of theme, perhaps, rather than ad hoc, random things being done to the paving. Can I get an understanding how that would be implemented? You know, somebody just randomly says, I'm just going to splash a bit of red paint down here and splash a bit of green paint there. How is this going to be actually implemented?
Mr. Haggett?
Yes, it will be a controlled process. The intention is obviously to provide some sense of a place for residents by taking some ownership over part of the space through making their mark. How that's done would be through a workshop process with artists engaged for that process as well, to ensure that there is some quality control. We certainly would do it in a considered way and not merely ad hoc.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I've just got two more questions and I'll be done. Street infrastructure, create pedestrian first zone. It says subject to funding in 2018-19 budget. I'm assuming that's meant to be 2019-20 budget, as we've already passed the 2018-19 budget.
Sorry, what was the...
so it was the last one. It was street infrastructure, create pedestrian first zone. It was paving the surface. It was actually paving the road, I think, is the suggestion. But it says subject to funding in the 2018-19 budget.
Yes, you're right. That should be 1920. Thank you.
Typo.
Thank you.
Prediction mate. Thanks, Councillor Gansel.
Okay, and just so I understand, just with the, maybe if I can ask the CEO this question, just with the footnote ones that you have on the under the officer recommendation, those ones that says to be addressed separately, for example, the bollards, would that be, are you referring to a separate report coming back to council?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's me done.
Councillor Hamilton.
All in all, I think it's great that we're doing a vibrancy project. There's a couple of things where I'm seeking to see if we can add in a sentence or two. The second last item, which is shopfront enhancement scheme. We've got there a certain amount to be spent, blah, blah, blah. But I also wanted to add in the a second sentence, which is request staff to source grants, potential grants for heritage buildings. Because obviously those buildings closest to the train station, there may be the potential to source grants to actually improve the facades of those heritage buildings. So if we could add something in like that, I'd be really happy. I don't think anyone would object to that because it's only just looking for a grant. I'll also bring up the under events, food truck events. I did raise this during the briefing session that I believe that regular food truck events may well conflict with existing established food businesses in the street, and since we are attempting to assist and elevate the business activity in the street, I would prefer that we have other events that are not conflicting. For instance, you could have growers markets, arts markets, craft markets, all those sorts of things. I'm not entirely sure that food truck event is something that I would particularly want to see there.
The opposites.
Yeah, that's noted, Councillor Hamilton.
And I do have one more, sorry.
Yes, Councillor Hamilton.
The third item is the mural on the Commonwealth Bank building. I'm not particularly keen on enhancing a building without some sort of contribution from the owner in this respect. I think that this particular one, there should be at least some sort of contribution from the owner, whether it be a proposal where we will do we'll organise it and do 50% of the payment and they contribute 50%. I'm not sure of the split there, but I am not particularly keen on giving out things for free in this instance.
Councillor Quinn.
I feel like we're just throwing ideas out now. So
yes, I'd like to propose that we
just do the same.
Perhaps we could propose a workshop. There's obviously a lot of questions.
I do feel like that there are a lot of elements that had this been discussed before it came to council, we could have ironed this stuff out. Because I feel like that this is not giving us the space to consider alternate things. So,
carry on. Sorry, Councillor Wynne.
I don't particularly think we need to defer it because it won't come back at least until February now, which I think would be a shame because there are some things we can do in the 0 to 3 months as low-hanging fruit. So what I might just do, as the others have had, is consider engaging a consultant like Spaced Out Placemakers and have them run their eye over it, or at least engage them to a cost and engage their expertise about placemaking. To ensure that we have elements of play design, particularly when we're going down into the 12 to 18 months time frame of under the heading Create Pedestrian First Zone. I think that there needs to be specific reference to accessibility in that point. It's alluded to, but it's not specific. And to also consider ongoing consultation with the community through pavement stickers that allow people with a website or a phone number that allow people to contribute ongoing ideas to the project.
Okay, we're looking for a way forward. So I think that's a little too confusing to take it to a vote this evening on the officer's recommendation. So the recommendation would be to perhaps employ a consultant. Is that what you were getting at? Councillor Wilson?
I appreciate Councillor Quinton's desire to seek expert advice, and I think generally that's a good idea. However, I think there's also considerations here, so I wouldn't support.
No, can I just make a procedural point or ask for some procedural assistance as well? Because there is an officer recommendation and there should be an opportunity to move that and then look to subsequent options.
Perhaps if I could, without entering into debate, just point out to councillors that the officer recommendation is to use the matrix as a guiding document rather than as the document or the prescribed document, and it's considered as a fluid document to be added and amended as we go.
Can I have a question to that then? How then would our feedback or the community's feedback be incorporated into the framework?
We would do it as an iterative process and we would add them in as we go. It's all about capacity to pay for them as well. So we would have to find the dollars as part of that process as well. But certainly I would see it as not a firm fixed document, but something that we would progressively amend as we see as necessary.
Councillor Helton?
Can I just ask the time frame, 0 to 3 months, when was that looking at starting? Like now or next week or January?
Next week's December, so let's use that as the start point.
Okay.
Look, I take the point that this document is reflective of the community consultation workshops we've had to date. Now we're just sort of, as Councillor Quinton said, we're starting to throw ideas out there. Probably ideas that should have been canvassed at the briefing session rather than rather than now. I'm looking for a way forward rather than, yes.
Oh, sorry, I'll have
seek,
for you.
No, I'll seek your...
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
your
Look,
guidance.
I'm happy with the officer recommendation, except for that one point in relation to removing the Chinese tallow trees. I note it says actually audit the street trees planted along Old Perth Road to identify opportunities for increasing canopy through either blah blah blah. Then it says report back to council by January 2019 the results of the audit and the options identified for increasing tree canopy and greening along the main street. But whereas in this document, if it's approved tonight, it says replace tree species that provide better leaf canopy. So it's actually contradicting what the motion was.
Given your experience, Councillor Gensel, what would you suggest as a way forward?
Well, as I said, I'm happy to move the officer recommendation and the framework with the removal of the removal of the Chinese tallow trees from the framework, as it is part of the footnote and a report's due back in January to council.
Can I suggest an amendment then to point 2 that we adopt it in principle, subject to some kind of changes, including yours? Cause
okay, very good. I'm happy with that.
I don't know why we would just take your change.
Yes, I know. Well, I'm happy to debate through. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Happy with that suggestion.
Yes.
I'm happy to move the recommendation that says adopts what was the wording?
In principle.
In principle, endorses in principle. The Old Perth Road supports in principle pending changes. I'm happy with that. If the part 2 started supports in principle pending changes the draft Old Perth Road vibrancy project.
I think that's what was intended.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy with that.
I was wondering whether Councillor Gaingel would accept an amendment to point 3, where instead of us telegraphing the $27,500 that we would have a form of words instead that reads Council seeks expressions of interest from Australian street artists such as Matt Adnate, Finton McGee and any other artists identified by town staff as having a high standard of work to undertake a mural or murals on Old Perth Road, and for Council to consider those expressions of interest as a confidential item at the next
Just
council.
a point, I don't think we can include the name of the potential suppliers in the resolution.
You have to put local artists.
Yes, well, Australians are local, aren't they?
Yeah,
No, so we can't. So
we can't
if you
put
could just make
specific
a
names.
slight amendment
So
to exclude those names.
Could you explain why we can't do that? Because it says such as.
I take guidance from the senior.
Explain to me why that's not possible.
I guess as a council, we have procurement procedures.
Yes.
And we need to abide by them. So
and
you are appointing a contractor. I don't know what the value of the work is as well. So I'd rather you say we appoint a consultant.
But okay, well, I'll just read again what it is that I'm proposing. The council seeks expressions of interest from Australian street artists, such as Matt Adnate, Finton McGee, and any other artists identified by town staff as having a high standard of work to undertake a mural or murals on Old Perth Road, and for council to consider those expressions of interest as a confidential item at the next council meeting.
Thank you.
Does that fit in with it? Okay. Is that acceptable to the mover as a amendment to point 3?
If the staff are comfortable with it, then I don't have an issue with it.
Councillor Gangel, can you read out your...
Yes, so it's so officer recommendation, but point 2 says provides in principle support for the draft Old Perth Road vibrancy project framework pending changes from council as attached to, and that continues on. Then point 3 as Councillor Wilson read out. So Councillor Wilson can provide the wording to Ms Holmes, the minutes clerk.
I second that.
Second it. Moved, Councillor Gangel. Seconded, Councillor Quinton. All in favour? That's unanimous. That had the potential to bog down. Councillor Gangel, thank you very much.
Councillor Councillor Quinton. She's like...
And Councillor Quinton.
Very
well,
good team.
Men always taking credit.
What are we going at now? 10.7. Moving on to 10.7, working groups, draft term of reference. The purpose of this report is to Council to consider the draft term of reference for the Access and Inclusion Workshop Group and the Suicide Prevention Working Group. Do we have Councillor Helton?
Okay, I was the one who asked for this to be pulled out of en bloc. If only to raise a question of staff resources for these working groups. I did raise this in an email exchange with Mr. Haggett yesterday, and I wish to question the response, Mr. Haggett, because if we are supplying staff resources for these working groups, in the end it really doesn't make much difference. It becomes very little difference between the committees and the working groups if we're using staff resources for all of these groups. And I'm concerned, and I'm expressing this concern, about the amount of staff resources that may be directed to working groups. Now, I would seek a way from the staff on how we can minimise that, and so I'm putting it to you again, Mr. Haggett. Do you see an alternative way to manage this? I've put forward to you a possibility that instead of doing written minutes or reports, that members of the working group could perhaps do a verbal representation to their committee, their oversight committee, which may save the requirements of minute clerks and things like that. Now, that didn't seem to be acceptable, and I do not understand why. So.
The experience that we've had with working groups over the years has been quite varied. There's been some very effective working groups that have been able to self-manage and achieve the outcomes without any administration oversight. However, there's also been experience where working groups were not as effective or as functional as or as inclusive, in fact, as was expected to be the case. And there was one particular instance where a member of a committee resigned as a consequence of an issue with a working group where there was decisions made that were not inclusive. And following that experience, we did a review and determined that the best way forward for working groups was for there to be officer representation, in fact officers to convene meetings, to attend the meetings and to take notes and report those notes to the relevant committees subsequent to that, as a safeguard for members, to ensure that the members had fair and equitable consideration in the process.
Okay, so we have 5 working groups, a minimum of 4 meetings a year. That's 20 meetings a year. Possibly 2, maybe 3 staff per meeting. I'm seriously questioning the economics of that, bearing in mind that you've said that there was 1 incident. So I seriously question the economics of that. Yes, I can see where some working groups may be perhaps more needed. Some of the work that they need to do might be more urgent, and where that might require some staffing, but I do not think that every committee requires staffing. So I'm bringing this up as an issue, and I'm trying to ask staff how we can address this without having such a drain on staff resources.
If I could defer to the CEO. Get a minute.
I'm happy to take that on as an issue, to have a look at how we actually address some of the issues that we do through community engagement, and whether it's through working groups or other means, how we provide an effective resource model and achieve the outcomes that we do. So happy to take that on and provide a report back to Council.
Can I just make a point about the suicide prevention working group? One of the projects that I envision the working group doing is the kids' mental health program, which is requiring staff time anyway. So
that's why I said some groups, not all.
Yeah, well, we've only got 2, so I'm just making a point
we've got
about
5 working groups.
Okay, but we're just talking about these 2 tonight.
No debate.
No, I'm just making a point that there is staff time required to complete that motion that was endorsed by council anyway.
You satisfied, Councillor Hamilton, with the response of Mr. Haggard and his CEO?
Yes.
On that basis, can I have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Quinton, second Councillor Mikachik. All those in favour? It's unanimous, passed unanimously. Moving on to item 10.9. Consideration. Councillor Mikachik, you want to raise that?
I apologise that this is a little bit out of... can I just ask for some tightening up of procedure, because it would have been great to kind of have a more open discussion, but I think either we allow open discussion or we tighten up on the kind of conversation we have to allow kind of equitable hearing for everyone. Yeah, I know everyone's in different roles and it's challenging, but yeah. Can we consider that in this meeting going forward?
Your point is taken, and thank you very much. Moving on to 10.9. Consideration of meeting dates and citizenship ceremonies for 2019. And I have a... Is there any discussion? Councillor Gangel?
No, happy to move.
Moved, Councillor Gangel. Seconded, Councillor Hamilton. All those in favour? It's passed unanimously. Moving on to 10.10.
Happy to move.
Moved, Councillor Gangel. Seconded, Councillor Hamilton. All those in favour? Passed unanimously. .13. River Parks Committee minutes 13th of November 2018. Let's find my place. Thank you. Councillor Mikachuk.
Yeah, through the chair, I just had a question, because there was this document on the table, and I'm not sure if it was an amendment proposed by a councillor, but it didn't reflect the recommendation that was voted on by the committee. So just first up, I just wanted to clarify for people what they're actually looking at when they're considering this item, just so people don't get confused.
This is a foreshadow motion?
Yeah, and does that come from anyone at the table?
It comes from me.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sorry, enough time to send it around.
Okay, it's yeah, just noting that it's...
Councillor Hamilton. Thanks, Councillor Mikachuk. Councillor Hamilton.
Okay. I had some concerns about some things which had not made it into the recommendation. The officer's recommendation originally in the committee was, I considered to be...
Can I just flag something procedural that
Councillor
we...
Mikachuk.
Do you want to move the motion?
No, that either...
Councillor Mikachuk.
I think there's a procedure with foreshadowed motions. Councillor Gangel, can you please help me out? Does one speak to them? Do you say it's foreshadowed? I understand there's not an explanation until it goes to debate. Just looking for some assistance on procedure, so it's fair and equitable.
Yes, apologies.
Yes, so generally speaking, Mr. Chairperson, convention has been, and again largely it is for the chairperson to determine, but generally convention has been to see if there's mover for the, in this case the committee recommendation or the officer recommendation, but prior to that occurring, any councillor can get up and have a foreshadowed motion that would be considered should the committee or officer recommendation not be successful.
But if that is the case, clarity about speaking to it or just saying that it is foreshadowed.
Yeah, just foreshadowed.
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Hamilton, you have a foreshadowed motion.
I have a foreshadowed motion. Do I read out the parts that are changed?
Certainly.
Okay. So the officer's recommendation, basically parts 1 and 2 are the same. Part 3 is replaced with part 3 that was in the original River Parks Committee meeting, which is in the attachments. Part 4 remains the same as the officer's recommendation on the agenda. Part 5 is deleted. Part 6 all the way down remains the same, but the numbering has to change.
Okay.
Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple of questions and then move the officer recommendation potentially with an amendment.
Yes.
Yeah, the committee recommendation. So, firstly, I wanted to, through the chair, thank Mr. Haggart again. Mr. Graham King. Graham's confused for the work that he does and the presentation earlier on, and just tying into some of those proposals. I note with these particular amendments in regards to the Ashfield Flats, we were just looking at that area, that specific area. Should one seek to incorporate some of those elements regarding responsible fishing, is that something within the scope of this recommendation?
Councillor Quinn?
Yeah, can I second Councillor Hamilton's foreshadowed motion with some amendments that we're going to speak to that?
No, I'd really like to move the officer recommendation. And
we've already had Kath move her foreshadowed, so we're in that
What we'll
process.
do is we'll put the officer recommendation, wait until the return of Councillor Gangel. We'll put the officer recommendation, we'll vote on that.
It's not
the committee recommendation rather, and we'll vote on that, and then the foreshadowed motion.
Can we just wait till...
yes, we will, that's what I said.
So is it okay if I just get an answer to that question?
So the question was in regards to fishing?
Yeah, responsible fishing. I had also raised that outside of a formal meeting. Is that something can be incorporated administratively? Can it be incorporated into this motion, given the element was just dealing with the Ashfield Flats on its own?
I don't recall anything specific in the Department of Planning's Land and Heritage's report in regards to fishing.
Yeah, so that's why I'm just seeking to understand the scope of where we could incorporate this.
So I don't recall anything specific, but of course that was a recommendation from the committee to council. So if council wanted to add something additional to that for officers to follow up, that's fine. We can do that. That would be an additional recommendation that council would make for officers to follow up.
Yeah. So I'd seek to move the committee recommendation with a couple of amendments, picking up on Mr. King's point. So. Just to clarify for people, so the committee recommendation said that it endorses all the recommendations of the WAPC, which included points A and B listed on this piece of paper in front of me. So I'd seek to have them reincorporated. Do I need to read them out?
If you wouldn't mind.
Well, would that not be another foreshadowed motion though?
Yes, it would.
I'm confused. I thought Councillor Hamilton had already moved her foreshadowed motion.
We can have 10 foreshadowed motions.
I agree, but we need to deal with hers first.
No, you deal with that after the
I just feel like there's a lot of procedural inequity in this evening and would seek to have it rectified in a fair hearing.
Those procedural inequities might have something to do with inexperience of the chair. But what we will do now is we will put the committee recommendation
Just for the,
Yes.
sorry, Mr. Chairperson, just for this, because it is quite lengthy and it looks like there's going to be quite a bit of discussion, perhaps suspending standing orders for this item to allow free and frank discussion to occur might be a way forward, and then recommencing standing orders once we're ready to vote on a motion.
You prepared to move that we suspend
Yes,
standing orders?
yes.
Moved, Councillor Gangel, seconded. Councillor Mikachik.
Yeah.
Suspension. All those in favour? All those against? I have the presiding vote. We suspend standing orders.
Yep.
Councillor Mikachik.
So-
Suspending.
For people that didn't have the opportunity to attend the committee meeting, which was quite lengthy, the major changes that deviate from what's possibly proposed was in regards to community consultation regarding dogs off leads. So it's a really important community area, and I didn't think that the officer recommendation kind of gave the scope to work with people to get a good outcome, and I feel that the alternative may not get the best outcome for the community, and really that's the only substantial difference. And I personally it was very well thought out and had the support of not only the committee members that sat there, but also the department representatives, which didn't have voting rights. And I just would request that should people seek to go down some variant, that they, one, consider that the committee voted on that matter unanimously, and please at least consider that to get a good outcome for the people to utilise that space, those elements be incorporated.
So, can I ask a question then?
Yeah.
So you say that it was voted on unanimously, but from my reading of the minutes, and sorry I wasn't there, so
yeah.
I don't follow, but from my reading of the minutes, there appears that there was a lengthy discussion and that it was split 3-3, and presumably you as the chair exercised a casting vote.
Yeah, and then on the second one it was voted on unanimously. But what I'm really saying for people that weren't there, putting all that aside, really we're here to represent our community, and I'm just trying to get a good outcome for people in engaging with the relevant stakeholders. Really that's what it seeks to do, and I would ask people have consideration for that.
Well, in the spirit of frank and open discussion, there appears to me to be 4 different communities of stakeholders down there. You've got people who are families who recreate. You've got people who go to walk their dogs. You've got fisher people. And then you've got people that go down there to do bird watching or sort of nature conservation type of activity.
Can I just say in response to that, that it sought to bring all those people together to have a discussion about
well, that doesn't, that intention at least, which I take on face value as being genuine, doesn't appear to be reflected to me in the wording of the committee recommendation.
And I would have loved to amend that now, but didn't through process really feel like I got the opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge that presents for you is that would just be another foreshadowed motion. So it's either we deal with the committee recommendation as it currently stands, or then we deal with the next foreshadowed motion, which in order would be Kath's after that. So.
Yeah, and can I just say it would be for an officer or the CEO or the presiding member to decide whether it's substantially different or not,
exactly.
not for another councillor to decide whether it's substantially different.
Yeah, that would be
Councillor
true.
Hamilton, your major amendment was to do, my understanding was to do with the monitoring of boat speeds. That was taken out of the original recommendation.
And I would have liked to bring it in.
Okay.
Well, what happened at the committee meeting then?
The simple solution may be to re-include that.
Well, that's what I've done.
No, but this significantly, it doesn't include anything about the consultation. It doesn't necessarily...
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No.
The consultation's in there. In point 3C, in consultation with representative community groups to control dog access at Ashfield Flats Reserve in order to assist with the management of future rehabilitation areas.
If you intend to have that in, that that's your prerogative. It just didn't reflect the committee recommendation. And if you didn't intend to include that, that's fine. I'm just saying it didn't include what in the end was voted on.
What what limitations do you foresee with representative community groups? Who's being excluded by that? I don't understand. Because representative community groups to me kind of appears to include all communities of interest. So I don't know how someone's being excluded.
So the main thing that I was really trying to do was get the stakeholders together. So in my wording, I had the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, because they're really the agency, and to work together with the town of Bassendean. And that's what's missing with that wording, because again, the intent isn't clear because we've suspended standing orders, and I don't get the opportunity to debate this properly. What I was really trying to do was say, just because we don't manage the land as the town, we should be engaging with the state government and all the relevant stakeholders to develop some guidelines. That the Planning Commission shouldn't dictate to the town of Bassendean, even though it is their land, they don't have a community or a constituency. They really, if you look back to that wording, what it said was that the town of Bassendean works with the Planning Commission, and that then what I wanted to include was the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, because it became apparent in that meeting that they were going to be one of the biggest stakeholders. And, you know, if you want to use the word stakeholders, if you want to use the word community, whatever the words are, my feeling was that the best outcome wasn't for the Planning Commission to dictate to the town of Bassendean how the community should use the space without working with them.
Councillor Hammond.
Part of my concerns is that the area we're talking about is a bush forever zone. So there are strict criteria surrounding bush forever zones, and it was clear to me in that meeting, because I was at that meeting, it was clear to me that that the state government has some very strong criteria around how to manage that area and how to rehabilitate that area. In particular, what I am concerned about was the suggestion that that the Ashfield flats be appraised to see what areas were worth keeping, what areas were degraded, in the effort to see if some of those areas could be opened up to dog walkers. Now, given that the whole purpose of the state government's aim is to rehabilitate the whole of the Ashfield flats and the foreshore, I have concerns about how we go about this. If we are, it's all very well for us as a town to liaise with these government departments, but I'm not entirely sure that we should be, dictating is the wrong word.
And do you remember what the word said? The town of Bassendean works with the WA Planning Commission and the Department of Biodiversity to, you know, to develop guidelines. I guess I'd just say to you, the WAPC doesn't have constituents. They don't have a community. You know, this wording says that they develop guidelines for the community of the town of Bassendean.
Yeah.
And what I'm asking is that I'm not dictating an outcome. What I'm saying is, can we get the major stakeholders to sit down at the table and have a discussion about the way the community uses the space?
Well, I guess ultimately that would be entirely the decision of the WAPC to make as the landowner, and I mean, we could request that they do that, but we don't get to.
And that's all it is a request, because you're right, we don't manage the land, and even the council resolution has no legal standard. We are kindly requesting, and I guess if you had been at the meeting, you would have seen the guy from the Department of Biodiversity say, I really like what you're talking about, we want to sit down at the table with you. And all I was trying to capture was, can we get the people that actually manage the land to sit down together? Because what you're going to have is something that's imposed on the community, and people aren't complying now. So how do you get people to comply? By having a conversation.
I guess so, but I guess to go back to your earlier point though, you say that the WAPC doesn't have a community of interest or a constituency, but the state of Western Australia definitely does. And the state of Western Australia, this is their agency, and there is a state government which is accountable to the people democratically. So
okay,
I'd love to go back to standing orders. So I can.
We're starting to talk ourselves around the corner. I wish some of this stuff had been discussed at the briefing session. What I'm inclined to do is to reinstate standing orders. Moved, Councillor Gangel, seconded, Councillor Wilson. And we will vote. All in favour? It's passed unanimously. We'll now move to vote on the committee recommendation. Can we have a mover for the committee recommendation?
I'll just, to uncomplicate things, just move it as it is. Although I would like to make amendments.
Moved as is?
No, actually, no, I would like to make amendments. I'm going to have the opportunity to have my say formally. So, and could someone please...
we're now in...
Do we not have a foreshadowed motion?
No, I would like advice from the staff about whether my amendments constitute amendments or whether it's a foreshadowed motion. If it's a foreshadowed motion, then I'll go back to what the recommendation is. So I'd please ask someone for their frank advice. Simon, I know you were, Mr. Stewart-Dawkins, you were also at the meeting. I would seek to reinstate under 3, A and B, which pick up on liaison with the Department of Transport. I'll read them out so someone can determine whether this is an amendment or it's substantially different.
I can say it would be substantially different. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Well, I will just move.
I might add though that that information is already in the report that the department has already provided to us. So that's one of the recommendations that's in the department's report about doing for example, the speeding boats.
Yeah.
To do something about that, and also looking at changing the traffic lanes for the boats. Those two recommendations have been taken out of that report, and so they're already sitting there.
And I understand that, and I'm not sure if unfortunately people understand the complexities of what was and wasn't in there, because actually the committee recommendation sought to adopt all the recommendations, including
that's right.
these.
Yes, that's correct.
So I will leave the committee recommendation as it stands.
So you will move the committee recommendation?
Yeah, if I included a point regarding Mr. King's, that would be substantially different.
No, because not the committee recommendation.
Through the chair, that would be just something that the council can.
Fine, if you could word that for us, please. We've got a second, a minute or two.
Yeah. That the town of Bassendean work with the WA Planning Commission and Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, you could have DBCA for now if you want to shorten it, to promote responsible fishing throughout the town via education and signage. I won't make it more specific than that.
Thank you for that. Do we have a seconder for the committee recommendation with that minor amendment? We have a mover, Councillor Mikucik. Do we have a seconder? I'll second it.
Debate.
We'll now enter into debate. Councillor Mikucik.
Okay, so just to clarify for people, the WA Planning Commission had a whole series of recommendations which included a fixed speed camera, how they would monitor speeds, how they would discuss which way boats may navigate around. The other recommendations were, I'm just trying to think the ones of biggest consequence, that no path realignment nor fencing would be reinstated prior to a hydrological study being complete, that they would maintain river views and connection with the river, and that they acknowledged that that was important to people, that they would seek to develop guidelines for the access and control of dogs on Ashfield Flats. I'm just trying to... So they were probably the biggest ones, and the committee recommendation sought to endorse all of those, and in my period of consultation post the agenda and the report being made freely available, overwhelmingly the community said to me that they feel like their comments in the consultation period had been incorporated in. So people seemed quite happy that that respected their feedback. I guess in the change of wording, as discussed earlier, I sought to bring the town of Bassendean together with the Planning Commission and the Department of Biodiversity to develop those, to, I guess, go through a process of prioritising conservation areas and develop guidelines. And yes, that does mean that ultimately the Planning Commission will and the department will have the final say. But I guess what I was really, not I guess, I know what I was intentionally seeking was an opportunity to consult with all the people that use that space, so not just dog owners, the different groups that utilise that space, so we could get a good outcome. I guess my fear was that the Planning Commission, without consultation with the user groups, would develop a policy, and that wouldn't necessarily lead to good environmental outcomes nor compliance. I don't know if people are aware, but well, you are aware that the Planning Commission manages the majority of the space. That means that the town of Bassendean isn't able to enforce the Dog Act. So at the moment, what's really difficult is generally people, there's not any compliance. There's no signage telling people where they can or can't go. There's no signage that talks about what's more precious or what's more degraded. So at the moment, in fact, there are signs that say you can have your dog off lead. So what we were really seeking was to get some agreement on where can people access the space, where can't they access the space, can it be enforced, or can we get some level of compliance from the community? Because at the moment what's happening is there's nothing that clearly states to people what they can and can't do, nor is there an ability to enforce that. And I guess the problem is that a Planning Commission says, this is what you have to do, but we've got no ability to enforce that. How likely is it that you can get the community on board? So I guess in my experience of working conservation land management, and in fact, I had a lot of experience in trying to get people to put dogs on leads, what I found was if you engaged with people and you could explain to them why it was important and have a clear delineation of where people were and able to go, you had a much better chance of getting people on board. Because at the moment there's not that ability. So I think it's really, really important. And the majority of people I speak to are happy to have their dogs on lead if there's an off-lead area. And all I'm seeking is that the Planning Commission works with the people that utilise the space and the other community groups about where those areas might be. So when it does put in place, it actually is sympathetic to the existing use of the space, bearing in mind that the environment definitely needs to be protected. So I would encourage people to, I'm not asking for a predetermined outcome, I'm asking for the stakeholders to sit down at the table and work to something that at least hears all the different voices, so there's a chance of getting a good outcome and getting the community, if you want to use the word buy-in or get on board. Yeah, I'd encourage people to really consider that.
Thanks very much. Councillor Wilson. Second. Look, I've been involved in this at a number of levels since 2011, and I'm a member of the River Parks Committee. The issues down there are contentious and broad, but the recommendations were sensible and well structured and voted on unanimously, as Councillor Mikicic said. My only concern was the deletion of the matter to do with speed control, and that has been addressed by Mr. Stuart Dawkins. I'd urge councillors to accept the unanimous recommendation of the committee that has amongst its members a broad variety of expertise and community members. So I'd urge you to support Councillor Mikachuk and the committee recommendations. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I rise to speak against the committee recommendation for a number of reasons, but first I wanted to reflect on Councillor Mikachuk's intent as she's conveyed it to us in the speech here, and endorse wholeheartedly Councillor Mikachuk's intent in wanting to have a broad discussion that brings together all of the community users of that space, and to ensure that all of the appropriate community users are accommodated as far as is legally possible. But the reason that I am voting against the the committee recommendation as it's currently worded is that, in my view, the foreshadowed motion that has been put forward by Councillor Hamilton better describes how the intent of engaging the community in the best use of this land could be done. And so I'll just go to the two main concerns that I have. One of the concerns in the committee recommendation talks about how there could be dog on lead and dog off lead exercise areas. The Dog Act doesn't talk about on lead or off lead. The Dog Act talks about dog exercise areas, and a dog exercise area can only be declared on land that the town manages, and therefore the only way that an area could be declared a dog exercise area is if the management of that parcel of land or portion of the land on the Ashfield Flats was to come to the town of Bassendean. Now, if that were the case, fire, feral and weed management would also become our responsibility, and there may be a whole range of other attendant costs that come with that. Now, I know that some people have a different point of view about how the Act is written and interpreted, but I'm very clear on what the wording of the Act says. It does not talk about on lead or off lead, it talks about effective control. A dog must be under effective control at all times. That's the wording. It doesn't talk about whether they're on the lead or off the lead. A dog can be off the lead and under effective control. A dog can be on the lead and not under effective control. It is about whether the owner of that dog is able to control the dog. The lead is irrelevant. We all know by experience, those of us who use the park, that there are many good responsible dog owners who use that space, whose dogs are under effective control, whether they're on a lead or not. We also know that there are many people in the community who let their dogs run wild through sensitive wetlands, through areas where birds are trying to breed, and are very disruptive to those breeding habits. And in fact, I noticed on the 6054 today there was a discussion, a resident of the town who loves to take bird photos in that area said that he was taking photos of birds in the wetlands today, but was disturbed with two large dogs who were bounding through the wetlands chasing after the birds without the owner anywhere to be seen. In that circumstance, that dog is not under effective control. Now, there's a lot of other issues relating to responsible fishing, relating to speedboats causing damage, but if we are to develop a plan that is enforceable, that makes sure that the environmental values of that space are looked after, as well as human recreation needs are accommodated, then I think the foreshadowed motion that Councillor Hamilton has put forward more broadly encompasses those issues, and that's why I'm voting against the committee recommendation, and why, if the committee recommendation fails, I will be voting in favour of the foreshadowed motion.
Councillor Hill.
Okay. Firstly, I don't doubt Councillor Mikachuk's passion, and I do understand that she only wants the best. So, absolutely understand that. However, the recommendations that came through from WAPC were many, and I was somewhat disturbed that we lost the opportunity to prioritise at least a couple of those that would give us some rather immediate effects in the area, i.e. the speed cameras, the potential of diverting boat traffic around a certain area. So even though you and Mr. Dawkins have indicated that it's in the body of the recommendations, it's not prioritised in the motion that came through from the committee. So that is one reason why I have actually put it back in, for lack of a better word. I also think that, you know, there are some aspects to the discussion which concerned me, i.e. the fact that the Ashfield Flats, I see that as a whole. I see that as something that cannot be divvied up into degraded areas and areas that should be enhanced. I see all of this as being, holistically we should be, and WAPC are, looking at rejuvenating the entire Ashfield Flats. So in that respect, I have concerns about a direction which would seek to partition certain areas, if you like, for whatever purpose, because it doesn't matter whether it's dog walkers or some other purpose. I think if we're really genuine about restoring these areas to pristine conditions, then we have to go in boots and all and do it completely and utterly. We can't be choosy about picking out little bits that we want to look good and little bits that are degraded, and why don't we use that for X, Y, Z. So if we are, as Councillor Wilson has said, looking at specific areas for off-lead for dogs, then we've got council land where we can look at that. We have areas, but we haven't actually looked at it properly yet. So I would suggest that those areas are where we should be looking first, rather than the wetlands, which is one of the last remaining large wetlands in the area. And we should not be looking at that as an area where we can possibly, if we negotiate hard enough with WAPC, get an off-lead area, or whatever the agenda is. I think that area is too important.
Speak against?
I am speaking against, primarily because of the loss of the intention through the speeding boats. I like to, and I know a lot of our community like to use that space. There's a kayaking club there. The speeding boats can disturb a lot of the serenity and safety of our community and our kayaking community down there. So that's primarily why I'm speaking against this, because of that loss. I would ask, and I will do this later, that perhaps we could erect a sign with the contact number for people to report speeding, so that there is real-time reporting of speeding. Lots of families use that space, so that's something that I think needs to be brought back into it. And the Dog Act section does specifically say that a dog shall not be in a public place unless it is held by a person who is capable of controlling the dog or securely tethered for a temporary purpose by means of a chain, cord, leash or harness. So that to me says that with state government land, they need to comply to their own state government legislation, and to remove the idea that the state government would not enact their own legislation would be contradictory. So it would not ever be an off-lead area anyway. So those are the 2 points. Please, I think we need to vote against this to put back the intention for safety of boat use, and perhaps even ask the WA Planning Commission to provide a report about responsible fishing. I would totally agree with that.
Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, just in regards to my right of reply, good lesson for me, because I I didn't see it as removing the speeding boats. What I did was I looked at all those recommendations and I went, each and everything they suggested, to their credit, has incredible merit. And I said to Mr. Simon Stewart Dawkins, you know, is there a reason these came in and that didn't? And he's like, oh, we can, you know, these are implementable now, whereas the other ones are going to take 18 to 24 months. And so just goes to show what can get lost in words. Mr. Bridges did make this point at the meeting, and another good lesson for me, there was no intention to diminish the value of the recommendations they had made. In fact, what I put in there was a word that said all. We support all your recommendations, including the ones about boats, that you listen to our community regarding the fence, that you listened that we wanted to walk beside the river. To their credit, they took all of that on board, and I went, wow, I'm actually looking at a set of recommendations and saying, I feel like we can support all of these because they really reflect what our community want. And I guess that's the first point. And if you had the opportunity to spend as much time as I spent in that whole community consultation document, you'd know how well, I guess, they reflected it, and that the committee recommendation only sought to support all of that. You know, you weren't all there, and probably no one spent as much time reading it as I did, so that was the intent behind it. In regards to conservation areas, I feel like I've got a bit of credit there. I have a bachelor's degree. What I can tell you is there are levels of quality bushland. That I can tell you as a scientific fact. I can tell you that part of the Ashfield Flats used to be a dairy farm, that there is nothing but weeds on a part of it. Yeah, it's all called a bush forever site, but Councillor Wilson knows that as well. Like, he knows it's a dairy farm in the areas. We also have a threatened ecological community, so it's federally listed. We are obliged under a federal act to protect that area. There is no fence there. There is no sign that even tells you it's valuable. There is no sign from the Planning Commission that even, in fact, it says you can have your dogs off a lead. I'm not talking about what we know as a council. I'm talking about if you have a state government that has a piece of land, what I'm trying to do is get some consistency in, like, one, okay, you're gonna go with that, it's on lead, have your signs, have your information about what's valuable. And what I was really seeking to do is say, you know what, there's been talk of a fenced exercise area. You want to have that on a bit that's a dairy farm? That's worth considering. You want to protect the federally listed Samphire community? That needs to be fenced. Because I know the subtleties, and I don't want to dictate that to anyone.
Councillor Mikacic.
I requested the Department of Biodiversity, who are the experts in that space, dictate that to people, and that they only come to some sort of agreement that can lead to enforcement and compliance in the area. That was the intent. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. With that, we draw debate to a close. We will now take a vote on the Office of Recommendation with the minor amendment as proposed by Councillor Murkichuk, moved by her and seconded by me. All in favour? Those against? Brown and Murkichuk against. In favour? Wilson, Gangel, Hamilton and Quinton against. The motion is defeated. Right. The foreshadowed motion.
So you have a mover?
And I would second it with the indulgence of Councillor Hamilton to add under 3A at the end of that sentence that ends with Ashfield Flats, and a sign be erected with the contact number to report speeding.
Boat speeding.
Boat speeding.
Dog speeding. Okay, so we have the.
What about the other one on the end that you have?
That a report come back to council with options for signage and fishing wire disposal bins that outlines responsible fishing. But I think Councillor Mikichuk had some better wording around consultation with the Planning Commission to do that.
I think Amy's got it.
Okay, can we have that? Can we have that?
That last additional point that you put in, you want to include that one.
Can you read it out? You might want to read it out.
The Town of Bassendean worked with the WA Planning Commission and the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions to promote responsible fishing throughout the town via education and signage.
Perfect.
You happy with that?
Yep. Including that point as a point.
That's the last. Put it on as an extra point at the end.
So moved Councillor Hamilton, seconded Councillor Quinton. All those in favour? All those against? It is passed. Councillor Brown, Wilson, Gangel, Hamilton and Quinton for. Against, Councillor Mikichuk. We'll move on to item 10.14, Audit and Governance Committee meeting held on 7th of September. 10.17 was passed on 10.14. No, 10.14 is not. I'll just 10.14. Do we have a?
Can I ask an officer?
Yes.
Okay. At the briefing session, Mr. Reid, you were going to come back to me about the. Because I remember I queried the change of use from reception centre to place of worship on that plot of land. Because in the Audit and Governance Committee meeting it said that it was one thing and this says something else, so you were going to come back to me with a definitive answer on that.
I understand, Mr. Costello.
For you, Deputy Mayor, yes, my understanding is that the property is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a planner, is zoned for light industrial. The purpose of the property is for place of worship and function centre.
So, with the amendment or the extra dot point that Councillor Wilson put in at the committee meeting, which I'm just trying to find it now.
I think it was subject to us finding out.
So that would cover it?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, I'll ask for somebody to move the committee recommendation. Councillor Gangel, second to Councillor Hamilton. Anybody against? All in favour? It's passed unanimously. We'll now move to item 10.18. 10.17.
Yes, I pulled it out.
You pulled it out? No, my mistake. To item 10.17, accounts for payment October 2018.
Okay.
Councillor Hamilton.
Okay, so I'll keep this short. Just on page 7 of the payments list, there's a payment of $2,866 for food safety services contract. Just curiosity, I thought that during the workforce plan we had employed an extra health officer specifically to help with the workload for food outlets and things like that. So this payment just struck me as being, is that?
As part of the workforce plan, there was an agreement to increase the environmental health officer from 1 to 2, but we are still retaining a company that assists us with the food inspections. It was never the intention that that service be brought.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wasn't sure if that's all. Sorry. Now, I also note that we're spending over $14,000 for mowing Bassendean Oval, Ashfield Reserve and Jubilee Reserve with contractors. I'm curious about that. I thought we purchased ride-on mowers either last year or this year in the budget, so I'm curious as to why we're spending so much with contractors for those three reserves.
Because we have weeds.
Through the chair, yes, we do engage some contractors to come in and assist us with broadacre mowing. I'm not sure whereabouts you're looking at. So in regards to
that was on page 2 of the payment figures. So it was $14,083 for mowing those three reserves.
Yes. So I might just need to take that on notice in regards to that work.
Yep,
we do have our own mowing gang,
yep.
But we also engage on occasions contractors to assist us when there's additional work required.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just there for our prime reserve. So now, a previous motion by Councillor Clinton indicated that any council-sponsored events would be plastic free. So we're sponsoring several events, but I know that we sponsor the Melody Club, so could we ensure that next time that they're plastic free? Thank you. I've not seen so much polystyrene in my entire life. So,
that's why you ordered that 20 years.
So, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Those things considered. Councillor Wilson, you have a question?
I do. On page 4 of 14, there is a line item there, EFT 36137, which talks about the purchase of compostable poo bags. $1,700 for compostable poo bags. I noticed though that the bins that we place, or that dog walkers would place, said poo. I understand that goes to general waste at the moment. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct. At the moment it goes to general waste.
I just wanted to foreshadow then. I was recently at a shop and I saw a bin, which is a freestanding bin which allows for compostable poo bags to compost within the bin, and wondered if staff are aware of the existence of such an item, or whether it's been considered in the past.
No, it hasn't been considered. So, I mean, of course, the existing compostable bags would go to general waste, to landfill, and so then they would, I suppose, break down in the landfill. So, but no, we haven't got an additional program to look at on-site composting of that material.
Okay. And so the existence of it is not known to you, though? It's not something...
No, it's not something we're familiar with. I mean, the additional cost, I think it's cost us an additional $7,000, I think, this year to buy the compostable bags, as opposed to the degradable bags which we've had previously.
Thank you. I'll attend then the next River Parks Committee with that information for the committee's consideration.
Thank you for your input. I'll now look to a mover for the officer recommendation. Do we have a mover? Councillor Gangel. Seconder? Councillor Quinton. Anyone against? All those in favour? That's unanimous. Moving on to 1018, financial statements, September-October 2018. Do we have any questions? If there are no questions, I'll seek a mover for the officer recommendation. Have a mover, Councillor Quinton, seconded Councillor Gangel. All those, is anybody opposed? All those in favour? It's passed unanimously. Moving on to item 1021, the implementation of council resolutions. I understand there's some questions in relation to this.
Yes. Okay, on page 81, the bottom of the page, ROC 18/60854 Brian Reid. I'm not sure, do we normally delete these motions before we've actually, because we're deferring this matter until February, so do we delete things before we're actually completed them?
That's at councillor's discretion, but it seems like there'll be another resolution coming out of the concept plan. But that was saying, unless you prefer to produce a concept plan by a certain date, we're going to go off and pursue the improvement plan, where the concept plan has been submitted by the required date.
Okay.
They did it.
Sorry?
They did what we asked them to
Yep,
do.
so that's fine. That's fine, we can delete that, I don't care. That's fine, I just wanted to know. The other one is Mr. Costarello. This is third from the top on page 81 as well, ROC 18-62198. Now that one, I would agree that most of that has actually been implemented. You've got there that's audit and governance, but actually the OCM number that you refer to is actually in an OCM, not the audit and governance. So the only thing that hasn't been done in that is writing to the ministers to see what can be done about vacant land and blah, 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 which seems to be a recurring theme. But that has actually, as far as I know, not been completed.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. It was one of those things that at the time that my learned colleague, Mr. Reid, had been writing to the Minister on a similar situation, and I believe that was addressed in that letter. If we want a separate letter, we can do that.
Shall we leave it in until the Mayor returns? Yep. Because I do recall that she had drafted a letter, but I don't know the status of it. No.
Can I just pick it up? So I had drafted a letter for the Mayor in terms of writing to the Minister for Planning about rate exemptions for land or incentives for development, but that letter has not gone to the Minister because I understand there's going to be a broader discussion with Council, with Ms Marks, about revitalisation of the town centre.
So can we still leave it in until the Mayor returns? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I refer to the third bottom item on page 82 of 85, which is OCM 26-318, which was a motion moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Ganshaw. I note in the action taken that officers have some take-home learnings from the implementation of that item. I'm not going to object to the item being deleted as per the recommendation, but there's another take-home lesson from that, and that is that I would hope in future that items similarly worded are actually implemented in the way the council moves it, because I do note that there were some elements of that motion that passed through, and I don't attribute any malice to that. I know everyone's very busy, but there were some elements of that motion that were not fully implemented, and I hope that was a learning experience for all involved.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. If there are no other questions or comments, no other questions, I'll ask for a mover with those deletions. Councillor Gangel, seconded. Councillor Clinton. All those in favour? It's passed unanimously. Move on to motions for which previous notice has been given. Item 11.1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Happy to speed up the meeting. Happy to withdraw 11.1, 11.2, 11.3, and have 11.4 referred to the Economic Development Committee. Therefore, the only item that I'll ask to be determined by Council is 11.5.
Councillor Gangel. Kenny Street parking bays. The council received a report in relation to car parking bays being clearly delineated on Kenny Street, with the parking bays being marked out with paint. Are there any questions of Councillor Gangel? Have Councillor Gangel move for that notice of motion? Do you have a seconder? Councillor Mikicic? All those in favour?
And could I just, sorry,
yes,
just quickly. I do note the officers saying that the action will be undertaken. So if the action is undertaken, then I'm happy for it to be in the section where it's resolutions. If it's already been taken, we'll just delete it, and so there's no need for a report if it's just. But I just want to keep it on the council books until the action is taken. Thank you.
So, moved Councillor Gangel.
Yes, thank you.
Seconded Councillor Mikicic. All those in favour? It is unanimous. Item 11.6, Bassendean Oval chain link boundary fence. The town of Bassendean engaged with the committee of the Swan District Football Club. The word is engaged with the Swan District Football Club to gauge their enthusiasm for realigning the chain link boundary fence on the southern or Old Perth Road side of the oval, thus creating a more accessible park and thoroughfare, linking the CBD with the river environs. Any questions in relation to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Just wondering who would be responsible for the cost of any realignment?
That is something, well, if I may, that is something that would be negotiated with the Swan District's Football Club, and any financial considerations will be considered in the 2019-20 budget. Is simply a matter of moving a chain link fence, not a complicated matter, to gain over a hectare of parkland, which would create a meander between the CBD and the river, a long-held ambition of the town of Bassendean. At the moment, there is no such easy path linking the CBD to the river. I don't know the financial cost, but that is something that could be considered once we get an indication from the Swan District Football Club.
Just a further question then, not that I'm disagreeing with the intent. To align it, would you align it to where the toilet block is on the sort of bend? Because obviously the toilet block is there predominantly for football use, so the perimeter fence would have to be within the toilet usage for the football match.
Absolutely, the exclusion, the fencing would exclude the current ablution block, which would remain within the Swan District's football
thank
club.
you.
So obviously I'm moving it. Do we have a seconder, Councillor Hamilton? Anybody against? All those in favour? That is passed unanimously. Move on to item 12, announcements of notice of motion for the next meeting. Do we have any? Councillor Gangel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. That council receives a report on the feasibility and costings of providing lighting at the boating ramp at Pickering Park, and also the possibility of CCTV surveillance cameras also being provided in that location.
Thank you, Councillor Gangel.
Oh, and sorry, there is one more, but it is a nomination for a person within the town, which I will put on record under confidential business, but because it's a nomination, I can't obviously make it public for council's consideration.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll move to confidential business, item 13. So thank you very much for members of the public that attend, and thank you for your patience and your indulgence. Thank you. We move a motion to go behind closed doors. Move Councillor Brown, second to Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? It's unanimous.